It's member-supported Hawaii Public Radio and All Things Considered. Today we're welcoming back a returning guest. You may recall we had the band America on as guests, Dewey Bunnell and Jerry Beckley together backstage at the Blaisdell, and now we're learning about the new solo album from Jerry Beckley. It's called Carousel, came out recently, and we're lucky to have Jerry on the line as our guest again. Aloha, brother. Thanks for taking some time for us.
My pleasure, Dave. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you for asking. Yourself? You must be real happy these days.
Yeah, it's a good time for us, good time for me. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome, and it's one of these records where when I hear the songs on this, has a very contemporary feel. There are a few covers we'll talk about, too. When did the writing process for the originals begin?
You know what? I keep an ongoing pile of tunes that I'm always working on. Some of these things might have started as early as 15 years ago, and some are pretty current. The opening track, Tokyo, I think I cut every few years. I've got 3 or 4 versions of that until I got it how I liked it. So each one's a little different. It's not a tight window of time.
Well, that makes sense. Sometimes you got to keep working on things, and that in and of itself is a little bit of a revelation. Record has a real rocking feel to it. For people who had the Here and Now album, they might be fond of the kind of sound that you bring up on this. One of the rockers is Nature's Way from Spirit. How'd that end up on this record?
Well, I don't think Dewey or I will ever be accused of writer's block. We've made our name with quite a few familiar tunes that people know now, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a list of your favorites. You know, I did 3 covers on this. Nature's Way is, of course, one of them. Just been one of my favorites for a long time. And when you have a studio, I had a studio at the house. So on any given week or weekend, you think, I don't know if I have a new idea. There's always that stack of covers. I always use the comparison of James Taylor. Nobody really blames James if he wants to do Handyman or something or Up on the Roof because he's got such a good body of work of his own. But he tends to be able to make, when he does a cover, he can make it his own. And that's what I strive for.
And in each case, that's a great way of describing what happened, because each of the songs is not even close to how the original sounded. It has just enough to bring that sense of familiarity, yet you grow it.
That's the goal, at least.
Counted, achieved, at least in my opinion. There's Minutes Count. Got some great guitar and keyboard, especially in the beginning. Very psychedelic. Is that you doing that? And if you can, talk about some of the cats who are playing with you on this.
All the guitar on Minutes Count is me. I think all the guitar on the album is me. Sometimes my son Matthew will play a little bit. You know what? My son Matthew played on Nature's Way. I don't have the credits in front of me, so I'm just kind of guessing.
Sure.
But yeah, I consider myself adequate on most of the instruments, and I think that sounds a little weird, but what it means is I got myself and my own abilities just to about the level that satisfies my needs as a writer. Some of my favorite guitarists, clearly George Harrison, I really love and emulate whenever possible. But guys like Joe Walsh and Jeff Beck, I consider were far more about the notes they chose or choose than the amount of them.
You mentioned these other cover tunes that you did. There are a total of 3 on there. Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying, cover from your childhood, I understand, by Jerry and the Pacemakers, as well as To Each and Everyone from Jerry Rafferty. And did you realize that you covered 2 guys who both spelled their name like yours in the process?
I've had so many different comments on that. One guy said, I'm not aware of any guy named Jerry in the group Spirit. Like he thought that was the defining thing. I was only going to cut the songs by guys named Jerry with a G. You know, it's just one of those weird things. There's not a lot of us, but...
you stick together.
I always loved Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying. I mean, Dewey and I are children of that era, and that's just one of my favorites of all time. So we used to do that in high school, you know, so I've been singing it for about 50 years.
That's funny. One that was very reminiscent, at least for me, it sounded almost like an ukulele in the beginning, Widow's Weeds. Great mix on that, intentionally mixed to sort of sound old, give it that kind of retro feel like it's on popping vinyl.
Well, that was the idea, kind of an Appalachian thing. I think when you do a solo album, first of all, just inherent in the nature of solo is that you're probably going to be singing all the tunes. If you're a singer-songwriter, there's a chance you're going to be writing them all. So that's why I try and use measured amounts of cover tunes, so that the mindset is not exactly the same dude all the time. I think one of the things that both Dewey and I, and with our early departed member Dan, we had the opportunity to pass the lead vocals around. Not only did the writing styles change, but the voice that you listen to. And I think that sometimes even the best of singers, an album, you can sometimes suffer a little bit by listening to the same guy's voice over and over again. So I try and find some ways to address those to make the whole album listenable.
Speaking of different voices, Jerry, and we're talking with Jerry Beckley from the group America about his new Carousel solo record. Whose voice is it on Once a Distant Heart? I do hope you enjoy these little songs.
It's a lady named Di Farrelly. I had a home in East Sussex in the hills of southern England for many years, a 15th century. It's a wonderful place, and it was in a small village. And there was a lady, when she discovered that I was a songwriter, she started sending me cassettes. She was a songwriter herself, and she had her living room set up with a little Casio keyboard and recorder and stuff. The songs were lovely, but more than that, she did these little monologues in between the songs. And so I've used snippets of Di Farrelly throughout some of my solo projects.
Okay.
That's who that is. She's unfortunately no longer with us, but she was a dear friend.
Well, it's a wonderful way to pay tribute to her, and voice has a place on Carousel, which is nice to hear the story behind it. No Way I'm Going to Lose You, that's my favorite riff on the record. Like a sort of reminded me of a slower version of Sister Golden Hair. Any insight into putting that one together, Jerry?
Well, that came from a great writer named Dan Wilson, who I don't do a lot of co-writing, but I had a period a few years back where I was just trying to reach out and meet with some people. And Dan, for those who follow liner notes and stuff, will know from his great work with Adele and the Dixie Chicks and stuff, he's basically Rick Rubin's go-to guy as a collaborator.
Wow.
He was in a group called Semisonic, and he wrote Closing Time and Secret Smile, some fantastic tunes. That's Dan, and this is something we wrote together. So there's a few covers on the album, but there's only this collab, and it was really a treat to work with him. I wish he's now moved out to L.A. He was living, I think, in Minneapolis for most of his career, but he's moved out to L.A., so hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, that Closing Time's a great tune. Still gets played on the radio, too. A couple tunes on there reminded me of, speaking of sort of modern rock bands from that era, too, a couple of them reminded me of like a ballad that Oasis could have cut. Lifeline was one of those. Talk about the theme in that song.
Lifeline is a personal story about some of my family and stuff, so there's a bit of a deeper message there. But the approach, clearly, on that song there's a nod. The horns are some of my friends who play with the group Chicago. It's a nod to, Saturday in the Park. Robert Lamb is one of my closest friends, and we've worked together on and off over the years. And so there's a bit of Beatles in that. There's a bit of Chicago horns. I think each one of us gets to be kind of a super group of all of our influences. Those are two of my biggest. I am and was an Oasis fan too, so I'll take that as a nod. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I love him myself, and just had Lee Loughnane on the last time Chicago were in town. Is that his work on there?
No, he's not. In fact, most of my horns are done by Nick Lane, who is a sub with Chicago. He takes Jimmy's place if Jimmy can't go out.
Okay.
But the same with Larry Klimas on the sax. These are guys that I use a lot. Horns are not really one of the go-to instruments for America records, so if I'm freed of those, and I don't mean shackles in a bad way, but if I allow myself a little more freedom, horns is one of the first places I go.
There were two songs that kind of brought the Oasis sound to light, and one of those was the title track, I guess, Carousel, piano on there. And what is that other instrument that sort of starts it off? Has like a nice, like there's a
it's a mellotron. There's a mellotron was an early kind of synthesized instrument that actually used tapes of real instruments. And so, for example, those flutes are most famously known for like the intro of Strawberry Fields.
Got it.
Is the flutes from the mellotron. So that's what I'm using right at the start of that. And then there is a beautiful oboe solo by a dear friend of mine who plays with the LA Philharmonic. It's always nice to add these extra colors to the record.
And that's exactly it. They add a lot of nice color. And the Carousel one got me thinking about you, because especially with the piano on the front of that. Is that you playing the piano on that?
Yeah, it's all me except for Charles on the oboe.
Stepping away from the record and into your own life, piano by the age of 3, it is written that you started playing. Can you explain how something like that happens?
Well, I was very fortunate. It only came about because my dad and mom, my dad was in the U.S. Air Force. We moved from Texas, where I was born, when I was about 2, and we moved to a suburb of London called Kenton. The furnished house that we rented, because when you're in the service, very often you're only there a year to 2, it had a piano. And so I just kind of found it, and, what's this, and started banging around on it. And my mom had the foresight to say, I think the kid's keen, and got me started with lessons. And so I took lessons from like 3 to 10, I think. But I always played by ear. I could read. By the time I was 10, I could read anything in front of me. But but I much preferred to just listen and interpret. And come 10, I switched to guitar because the Kingston Trio, and then shortly after that, the Beach Boys. So by 12, I had pretty good thing going on both of these instruments. And then come the British invasion, most of that stuff was either piano or guitar music, so I was set.
How do you at 10 meet a bunch of other kids who can play well enough that you can form your own band, the Vanguards, doing a surf rock sound in Virginia?
Yeah, you know what? It's a difficult thing when you grow up in the service because you move. There are certain elements of your life, for example, lifetime friends, very rare to have things like that, a hometown, things that a lot of us just take for granted. And so it is tricky, and I found that people become one of two sorts when you grow up in the service. First of all, you don't know any different. So it's not like you're continually bemoaning this life that you've inherited. You don't know any different. You've always traveled. So I don't want people thinking it's negative in that way. But when you do learn to move on, you get pretty good at saying goodbye and then on the other side, getting to know people. And so I think one of the things that I used as an extension of my own self was this connection of music. And so if ever you got to a town, I would look up, who's in a band and who are the musicians and stuff. And it wasn't long before I was in a band virtually everywhere that we were stationed.
That's a great way of looking at it, and a lot of insight into the life of a child of military personnel. And that
you have such a deep in Hawaii. There are so many people who know that story inside and out because of all the bases and the rich history of the services there in the islands.
I was going to ask you, because of your father's military career and the way the band came together, sort of based around being kids of people in the military, has that influenced your thinking of realizing the important place in our society that the armed forces and their families hold?
It's an incredible education. Yes, that's a lesson that doesn't need to be overstated because it is so glaringly obvious. But I can tell you another thing is growing up in that environment, the ability to travel, which you really didn't have any choice. You're traveling with your family anyway, but the worldview that you get and just the perspective that is imposed upon you, whether you want it or not. I grew up in England, and Dewey, I think, was actually born in England. But Dan, our original third member, he lived in Thailand, and I was in Germany for a while. It's an immense education that you get just by opening your eyes and ears.
Well, it's funny you say that because I just recently had the privilege of spending some time in 3 different cities in Italy, and I was coming around a corner. It might have been Piazza della Signora or Piazza della Repubblica, and I hear the sounds of a horse with no name, and it's a busker standing there playing it, just echoing off the buildings.
Well, we love Italy. We've had a great deal of success in Italy, actually, a lot of hit records there. We had a song called Survival that was a #1 record in Italy. It was never really even released as a single here. So as a result, we got to go often, and as you probably know, it's just the most beautiful place. Lovely.
Great sense of home, though, to have it there. It catches you really strong feeling, makes you just stop in your tracks and like, oh, I guess I'm going to stop and listen to this.
Well, I'm always honored if ever I have a circumstance like that. It's never get tired of hearing some of your music around the world.
Yeah, no, I bet, man. Before we wrap it up, the Beatles producer George Martin got involved in your life. We've been talking about Europe a little bit, and he ended up doing what I can calculate at 5 albums for the band America. Can you explain how he got involved and maybe share a memorable story? And that could even be when you guys did a record in Hawaii together.
Well, I can tell you that even though there was actually 7 albums, there were 5 studio albums, but he also oversaw the assembly of History, the Greatest Hits, and also our first live album, which was at the Greek Theater. I group all of those 7 albums, including the Harbor album, which we did in Kauai in '77 on the island of Kauai, as one kind of experience. Each album was, of course, a very different thing, different songs, actually more often than not different geography involved. But the constant of getting to work with a master like that was just, I put it as the top when people say, what's the highlight? Well, that's the singular highlight. The short version of the story is after we produced the first 3, it was becoming more and more pressure, and we thought, well, maybe let's turn this over to somebody, free us up a little bit, because we were doing a lot of live shows and stuff. And we just, top of the list was George. We thought, well, we'll start at the top, see how we go. And we didn't have to go any further. He said yes, and it started us on a 6 or 7 album run. One of those was the incredible experience of doing the Harbor album on Kauai, where we barged over the record plant mobile unit to the Poipu side of Kauai. We rented 12 houses on the beach. Almost every one of those is now gone because I think it was a Nini or one of the storms came through when we were done and tore it all out. But it was a fantastic experience. We lived there for a few months, and I'm still, not that I don't love all the islands, but particularly fond of the Garden Isle.
Good for you, man. And that can and they barged that all the way from L.A., that gear?
I think they flew it over to Honolulu and barged it from there, but
Okay.
I wasn't actually on the boat. So
Right.
it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. And we put it in the biggest house. It was big enough for a studio, and it's just unbelievable experience. Learned how to scuba dive and stuff.
What side on the island again?
On Poipu.
Okay.
Right on the way, right between the beach house and Spouting Horn. That whole stretch there, if you're familiar with the Poipu side of Kauai.
Look at you. All the local people are loving it, brother. They're throwing you the shaka with your strong relationship to the islands. It's a new record has brought Jerry Beckley from the band America back to the program. Carousel is what it's called. When are you and Dewey coming back with the group? When are we going to see you in person?
It sounds like the spring. I've heard rumor of the spring, and I wish I could give you dates, but I tell you, whenever anybody asks me, how come it's been so long since you've been to Scranton or wherever, I always say, look, it's not up to us. If it was up to us, we'd be playing Hawaii every month.
Make us a deal. If that gig happens, we'll get a chance to get together with you when you're in Honolulu.
My pleasure, Dave. I'd love to.
It's Jerry Beckley from the group America. Carousel is the new album, and been a real pleasure having him on member-supported Hawaii Public Radio and All Things Considered today. Stay safe, Brother Jerry.
Thank you, Dave. Aloha. It's Jerry Beckley from the band America. You've heard me here on All Things Considered as a guest of my friend Dave Lawrence. Thank you, Dave. Nice to talk with you, man. I wish I was there.